and tired of STDs being transmitted so rampantly without us being ever able to track where they come from, with no check and balance or liability on the person necessarily. So we say that we want to make a database, so we can always refer back and we can check this program in the speaker. So this is how our mechanism is going to work. So how do we first incentivize this person to come forward? So we say that information will still be made public. However, it will be subjected to the same kind of module like the National DNA Registry, for example, where you cannot access the data unless you have a reason to access the data. For example, you cannot just pry into anyone's and any random person's information without having any proximity towards the person. Like for example, if you're the girlfriend of a person and then you want to know whether the person it will be safe to have sexual relations with the person, you can come forward and then tell the person that you have proximity with the person. And then the registry will then check a cross-reference with the person and call the person up to make sure that there indeed is a relationship between these two persons. But then if the person says no, I don't know this girl, then that's discourse in itself. That tells the girl or the boy or the guy that that guy has something to hide. So then what she chooses to do after that, then is her choice. So that makes that makes discourse possible. But then, Mr. Speaker, this debate must pre-assume that the National Registry of People with HDD can exist regardless of whether these people are criminals or not. So, Mr. Speaker, we want to make this clear distinction because in our database we have two categories: one for criminals, criminals STD offenders, and another database for civilian STD offenders. Because we want to make that distinction extremely clear, Mr. Speaker. Sit down. Sit down. I'll take you later. So now we also have different degrees of punishment because we want to criminalize people who intentionally or unintentionally spread STDs to other people, Mr. Speaker. For example, like different STDs which are less harmful or bring less harm towards a person's health. Things like herpes or crabs, Mr. Speaker. Those kind of things probably can be fined or something more based on the damage that they cause. But things like AIDS, things that bring a huge amount of damage to a person, things that does not would harm a person's health, things with no cure. So intentionally you have damaged the person's life. We equate those kind of things to murder, Mr. Speaker. Murder, and if you unintentionally spread those diseases, then we equate that to unintentional manslaughter, Mr. Speaker. So then that's why it's important that this database occurs, so that unintentional spread also does not happen, Mr. Speaker. Because now they know that they have HIV and they have more accountability, Mr. Speaker. Sit down, Mr. I'll take you soon. So we believe that it's extremely important that the spread of the spread of any STD disease be controlled, and then those people be accountable, and then they know that they are accountable, Mr. Speaker. Because under status quo, when they are not held accountable, it's much easier for them to claim that they didn't know or that they had no liability, Mr. Speaker. But when we put this liability on them, we say that they now have intention to spread, and then they know what the consequences are. And also the person having sexual relations with them will know the consequences of that, Mr. Speaker, because they now have access to that database. Sit down. I'll take you later. So why is it so important? I'll talk about this on 5 levels. Why is it so important that we equate STD to a crime? Firstly, STD is tracked, and then I'll talk about the harms of STD, the rights of unsuspected victims, and then whether or not this is a fair price to pay, and shifting the burden of the STD people to come up. Before that, yes.
I just want to know one thing. When you create this public database for public access with your regards to habits and proximity, do HIV carriers have consent of giving that information, or is the state going to force them to do this?
Those people will be forced to come forward and to declare that whether or not they have HIV. And I'll also explain why they have personal incentives to do that also. This is later in my third sentence. So now why it's so important to equate STD to a crime? Because STD is extremely hard to track. You don't know when you look at a person whether or not they have crabs or whether or not they have any form of STD disease. Some of them even though some of them may be healthily impaired, but you will never be sure whether or not a person has a certain STD. So some person who have multiple sex partner and different form of lifestyles, you can never track whether or not a person has an STD. So that's why it's important for us to have a database for that. So I'll answer that in my third substantive, so just listen. harm of this, Mr. Speaker. The harm of intentional spread of HIV or AIDS or any STD which could cause a huge health impairment is you destroy another person's life. So what you do with that is that you know, even though you declare that you don't know, but you're knowingly hurting a person's life when you understand that there's no cure to that, and that a person can probably never get better. You destroy a person's immune, and if the person is young, you destroy their entire course of life, Mr. Speaker. So it's an extreme harm. But then again, making a crime without a national registry is just bad policy, because you don't have a database to then refer that to. So that's why this database is extremely important, and that's also why we have two different databases for criminal STDs and also for civilian STDs, Mr. Speaker. So people who have already committed crime know that their database is there to make sure that they don't have repeated offense and things like that. And people and civilians are also there to know that they were not criminals, Mr. Speaker. So now we say that the rights of unsuspected victims also supersedes the right of privacy to this infected individual. As much as we want to say that those individuals who were infected with HIV people have the right to a certain amount of privacy. But we say when people have a close amount of proximity to them, those people have a right to know, because those people will then be infected and will then be affected by the fact that the person is infected by HIV. So that's why we say these unsuspected victims should have access to a database where they can know whether or not they're safe with the person or not. Because now the only thing that you can rely on is the word of that person. And we assume under status quo that the word of the person is true, but we know that people lie a lot. But now when there's a database and the person refuses to allow you to check their database, because that's already discourse on its own. So then there will be a huge amount of decrease of unsuspected victims. So then I'll assume that the person with AIDS will be condemned, and is it a fair price to pay for them, as opposed to the harms that they were done? Just because we believe that this database is one of the only things and the last barrier that we can rely on to make sure whether a person has STD. So then we say that it's a fair price, even if the person will be condemned to a certain extent. So it's a fair price because it's that important that the unsuspected victim and the spread of HIV be controlled, Mr. Speaker. And then now answering the question whether or not this will shift the burden to the person of STD and the person around it. Because you say the person unknowingly spread HIV, they know that they have criminal liability now, so that they have a personal incentive to come forward, so that they know that even if they are unknowingly spreading it, Mr. Speaker, that they will have liability, so they have to come forward and check whether or not they have STD, Mr. Speaker. That's why we're extremely proud to propose.
I'm not going to use the mic. Mr. Speaker, Madam Chair, the stance from Science Opposition is simple. We think the rights to an individual's privacy should be upheld by the state, Madam Chair, and we think that in status quo there are enough check and balances to hold individuals accountable if they take advantages of their privacy itself. But let's just look at what the problems are coming from the government bench, right? Firstly, they claim that it's a public access and somehow you don't have to have a reason to access this database. We think firstly, Mr. Speaker, you have not drawn a clear distinction of what sort of reason can you actually have in accessing this database, right? You're looking at individuals who are potential employers who might actually go into this database and claim this individual as a threat, right? If you're looking at two types of database, we think at the end of the day, even if it's your intent to criminalize someone, we don't necessarily think you need a database to criminalize that individual, Madam Chair. We think that in status quo, a medical institution as well as that individual, whether or not he or she knew he had AIDS before they wanted to spread it out, Madam Chair, we think there is enough investigation status quo or enough documentation to hold both individuals accountable. The problem is, why do you need to let the public know about that? But let's just look about a third level, right? This whole idea of this whole shopping list of why STDs and HIV is a crime. We state, yes, we do understand that, right? And we think that individuals in status quo, there are two ways in which you can criminalize an individual, right? Or when a state can intervene to give a check. Firstly, if that individual knows that he or she had HIV or STD and and did it either ways, right? We think those individuals are the kinds of individuals where you can criminalize them, Mr. Speaker. Even if status quo, you think that the level of punishment is not enough, we are more than happy happy to increase it, right? But on the second level, let's just talk about the mandates of spouse checks, right? Like for example, in Maldives, you're allowed to, both the husband and the wife who's about to get married has to get a check for thalassemia, right? Or even in Jamaica, right? Spouses actually has to have a check whether or not they have HIV/AIDS. I think at the end of the day, right, these both checks, right, has the right to privacy. That means only two people that are involved with the checks are only the ones that know, not the public, right? Like I don't need my employee to know what was my medical history if I had HIV/AIDS, right? You need to define very clearly what public access is all about. Let's just talk about the first level, right? The efficacy of the policy itself. Let's just look at the intent of a government wanting to force this individual who has HIV/AIDS in putting their name in the database. One, you assume that individual has the intent of a criminal intent of actually wanting to spread the HIV/AIDS. We think a government assumes that wrongly, Mr. Speaker. But on the second level, we think at the end of the day, right, when they're pushing these individuals and forcing them to reveal their HIV/AIDS, right, you're looking at a government that is actually now using the law as a preemptive measure in actually pushing these individuals to the scum of society, right? We think this is inherently harmful on two levels. One, firstly, when you're forcing an individual, Mr. Speaker, to reveal something that is very private, you're now creating rooms for other areas within society to exploit it. How is this so, Mr. Speaker? Let's just look at whether or not you actually use this database or the times you use this database, right? We think like, for example, if you're having sex, right, it's very circumstantial. It's the heat of the moment. You don't have time, before having sex with you, let me go on the computer and check whether you have HIV/AIDS, right? But on the second level, Mr. Speaker, we think even when you're compromising that particular small information, right, you cannot, it's a balance of rights, right? Because of that one small possibility that you might actually check whether or not this person has HIV/AIDS or not, we don't necessarily think that you should put a blanket policy on every single individual that are HIV/AIDS in revealing whether or not they have the disease, right? But it's like on the third level, right? Sit down. On the third level, we think at the end of the day, right, a government cannot assume an individual has the ill intent of spreading the disease if he or she has HIV/AIDS, right? That's inherently harmful. Why? You're discriminating this individual. You're discriminating an individual that at certain times was unfortunate to be in that situation in the very first place, right? So we think these sort of public databases actually exploit it. You put individuals in an unfair position in something that they hold very dear to, right? You need to understand the idea of confidentiality, right? This confidentiality is a protection for them against discrimination that will inevitably come in the outside world because you can control the intent of public and what they perceive an HIV victim is all about. Let's just look at the second idea, right? This whole, before that, go.
Like you said, in countries like Maldives and Malaysia, if I can prove that I want to marry another woman, and then I can breach her right to privacy over her whatever STDs she's holding. So in our model, if you can prove that you want to have sex with somebody, why can't that breach of confidentiality?
The difference is that under your explanation, it only exists between two people, but under our policy, right, it only exists between two people. But under your policy, right, it gets to spread out to more than anyone besides the spouses, right? Anyone else can find out what this person does. Don't just assume that your caveats of checking this database is actually concrete, right? And this is where it goes nicely to the second level argument, right? The fear of the information itself. We think at the end of the day, right, we think individuals can create any form of reason to access this database, right? We think employers who now has the legitimacy to actually access this database before hiring someone, right? We think at the end of the day, individuals are abused. Why? Because HIV victims are considered to be the scum of society. That is the public opinion on what these individuals are. You can have all the campaigns in the world, but at the end of the day, if I am standing in front of an HIV/AIDS victim, my tendency is to be much more seclusive rather than, actually not knowing whether or not this person has an ill-fated disease and whatnot. But let's just look at the second level, right? The fear of information and how it can be used against these HIV victims. You are now looking at employers who might have arbitrary reasons of not hiring this individual, Mr. Speaker, because they now know that they have HIV/AIDS, right? Watch Philadelphia, you know what I'm saying, right? We think at the second level, we're looking at individuals right now who does not have the lines of defense in showing their innocence towards society itself. We think this is where, Mr. Speaker, how does the government necessarily contain individuals, or even if they have the intent of spreading, right? We think the idea of criminalization can exist. We have the normal check and balances and status quo to hold individuals protected from individuals who have ill intent of spreading this disease, right? We think at the end of the day, your possibilities of checking this database on whether or not your partner has HIV/AIDS, Mr. Speaker, is very minute. For that small chances of them checking this database, Mr. Speaker, does not come to the expense of rights of privacy for individuals that has respected their space, Mr. Speaker. When you're looking at getting a checkup, when you have identified yourself to be an HIV positive victim, Mr. Speaker, the medical institution knows and your spouses knows, Mr. Speaker. There's no need for anyone else to know. There's no need for other individuals to come and access into your private life when you did not consent to, Mr. Speaker. At the end of the day, a government cannot hold these individuals accountable for any reason that they want to keep themselves private, within their body itself. At the end of the day, you're creating a floodgate effect where individuals can come up with fake reasons and give them fake reasons to not hire them in the future, Mr. Speaker, or to even communicate with these individuals. We're very proud to oppose.
I'm sorry, Mark, you are the weakest link. I'll tell you why, Mr. Speaker. Because clearly he didn't want to listen to Jasmine's speech of the extensive kind of mechanism that we told you. Number one, if you don't have proximity to the person, what kind of fake reasons are you able to give a national registry when that person will have to, the national registry will have to call that person and check whether or not you have proximity or not. And if that person says, no, I don't know this person, why would the hell would government give up that information the same way you don't give up public financial records of companies or public financial records of governments, Mr. Speaker? Every sort of national registry, regardless of it being financial, DNA, or STDs, Mr. Speaker, function on the basis of proximity and whether or not you have a legitimate, substantiated reason for you to access those records. That's why the harm of the red herring that came from Mark doesn't exist in this debate, Mr. Speaker, because it exists in a vacuum when regulation and proximity don't exist suddenly, Mr. Speaker. We think it was a completely non-rebuttal. Secondly, let's examine this idea about employees suddenly being able to access. We think if you're a kindergarten owner, Mr. Speaker, and you want to employ a teacher to interact with children, and you feel that you need to cross-reference the employee that you're about to take on and check whether this person has AIDS or not before he interacts with children, we think he should be allowed to do so. So what if his confidentiality is broken a little bit, Mr. Speaker? The converse burden that opposition has to prove in this debate is that if this confidentiality isn't broken, kids will suffer AIDS if this person even suffers a little bit of a cut while serving hot tea to kids, Mr. Speaker. We think that the converse harm in this instance, Mr. Speaker, is far too great, considering that AIDS is a definite death sentence, Mr. Speaker, Madam Chair, and confidentiality is something that's an intangible harm, considering that AIDS will definitely lead you to death, Madam Chair. We think confidentiality is a sufficient price to pay in this instance. We don't care. Thirdly, Mr. Speaker, we think that they wanted to defend criminalizing, guys, sit down, guys, jeez. They wanted to defend criminalizing without a registry. We told you, this is absolutely ridiculous. It's like checking for DNA and collecting DNA with no national registry to cross-reference it with. So how are you supposed to know what semen and who it belongs to if you have nowhere and no list to refer from, Mr. Speaker? Manual work has never been effective when it comes to legitimizing or identifying DNA, Mr. Speaker. That's why you need a registry. Lastly, their whole case is a pre-assumption that check and balances exist. This is where their case falls. Because AIDS cannot be detected by your hair follicles, Madam Chair. AIDS cannot be detected by the semen that you ejaculate, Madam Chair. AIDS can only be detected specifically and exclusively with the blood that you shed. That's the only way, in 6 months, Madam Chair. So, and that's the reason why, if once you rape someone and sexually transmit the disease, how are you expecting to find who is the origin of the person that this AIDS comes from if that person hasn't spilled any blood, unless you're into that weird shit, weird stuff, Madam Chair. But if you're not, Madam Chair, semen and hair follicles when you have sex or rough sex, Madam Chair, whatever you like, but I don't know why I'm saying that. But the point is, you won't be able to cross-reference it anywhere, and you won't be able to find this person because AIDS is extremely hard to trace and detect. That's why you need a national registry to be able to identify the DNA and connect it to the disease. It's very important. Secondly, it's a contradiction for them to say that they want marriage in Maldives to have a check on your status of AIDS, Madam Chair, of your partner. That just proves that proximity equals you being able to circumvent a person's confidentiality when you have a certain amount of harm or risk, Madam Chair. Lastly, is that these people who are in the heat of the moment, Mr. Speaker, in heat of the moment, therefore you can't blame them. Exactly, Madam Chair. They pre-assume that in today's world, people only have one sex partner. Let's face it, Madam Chair, the whole world is your oyster when it comes to having sex, right? And everyone is at risk of being sprayed. Even a simple cut, Madam Chair, transmitted through a drink or what have you, Madam Chair, will result in a transmission or a risk of transmission. That's a risk that we're not willing to take, even if it's in the heat of the moment. Before I go any further, yes.
These people don't have consent in giving information, right? But they're going to have a database. So if I don't want to tell my partner I have AIDS, she calls the registry calls me, and I'm going to tell the registry that yes, I know this partner, please let her know. Like that's ever going to happen.
Yeah, and if it doesn't happen, Mr. Speaker, and Madam Chair, and the partner tells the National Registry that no, I don't want her to view it, I don't know her, and then the National Registry tells the partner that oh no, this person doesn't know you. Obviously, if your wife tells a National Registry that he's not your wife, you're going to think something's up, Madam Chair, and that starts the discourse. Obviously, guys, geez, keep up. Lastly, let's talk about my substantive. How do you protect innocent victims of HIV/AIDS in society, Mr. Speaker? Because right now in status quo, in communities, there is a homogenization of HIV victims, Mr. Speaker. Immediately when somebody has HIV/AIDS or recently infected with HIV/AIDS, the first person that you point to is the person that has been openly HIV/AIDS and has told everyone that he's innocent and you should be aware of being around me, Madam Chair. These are the people that we want to emulate, and these are the people that are safe, Mr. Speaker, because they take on the responsibility of letting the public know and wanting the public to be safe. But the homogenization victimizes them because they're the only easily identifiable HIV-infected person in the vicinity, Madam Chair. Why does this registry help? Because number one, you make it easier for people to come out because now you know you'll be protected under the law, Madam Chair. Because of the dual system between a criminal and a civilian people who are infected with STDs, now they know that I'm a civilian, you can cross-reference me with the person that just got raped and infected with DNA, and you won't find my DNA, and you won't find that I'm the one that's infected with HIV/AIDS that infected this person. This person is legitimized and told that this person is innocent, Mr. Speaker. That alone, and that assurance to HIV victims that they will be able to escape condemnation in society because they know they will be protected under law and distinct between a person who is criminal and a person who is not, allows for a person to have the safe heart or peace of mind to come out and register themselves and be able to tell society that I am fine, I am safe, and I am aware that I have HIV/AIDS. We think this awareness is non-existent in society because right now you expect people to just assume or ask your partner, hey, do you have HIV/AIDS? No. Alright, let's do it. We don't think that this shifts the duty enough. We need to place a duty on people to ensure that if you don't know you have HIV/AIDS, you better damn well find out, Madam Chair. If not, you will be criminally liable. This shifts the duty of individuals to people who might or might not have HIV/AIDS or are unsure. This protects individuals who are innocent with HIV/AIDS and reduces the stigma of people who have HIV/AIDS. We are supremely proud to propose.
Here. You okay? First thing I learned about debating, Mifzal, is never take pot shots at the opposition. It makes you look weak. Let's go on with a couple of rebuttals and then move on to 4 substantives that I have. Number 1, they tell us that proximity is an issue. Mr. Speaker, let's be very frank. The idea of proximity that came out of Jasmine was very, very vague, right? I will call you to find out if you have a partner and then we'll determine that proximity and so on and so forth. That assumes that the person who has HIV will then not lie, that that person will always consent to the idea of this person having a proximity, but otherwise, they will, if the person lies and he's found out that he's lying, they will be criminalized. The difference on our side is this. If you really want to find out that this person has a HIV, shut up, Mufsal, right? Shut up. If I want to find out if my partner has HIV, what I will then do is I can go to a medical institution that has that information and I can find it out for myself. But when you have a database, a public accessible database,
that has the information of you that is accessible by anyone using the yardsticks of proximity, we think that's a problem. We think only if you want to marry a person, like when they do in the Maldives, and only if you intentionally spread the idea of HIV, will criminalize those actions. And if you want to marry this person, you then have a right to find out beyond his sovereign privacy whether this person has HIV. But if your problem is about promiscuity and people who want to have sex with you and want to have relationships with you, they don't have that capacity to check this database at the point in which they want to take their clothes off. That's when we think there is no necessity for this database to ever exist when it breaches the privacy beyond what is necessary compared to our model. We think the breach of privacy is only necessary when a person wants to commit himself fully well to the marriage and live a life that is full well to this person. Especially if this person knows that he has HIV and passes it on, we then can criminalize that particular action. What then is the necessity of this? Sit down. Secondly, they tell us, well, the check and balances are not enough. Fine, we agree they're not enough. You can educate these people. We can identify these people already. Identification has never been a problem in the medical institution as far as HIV people go. We can identify these people. We can give them sufficient amount of information of how much they are a threat to society. But the moment you create a database that allows people to discriminate them, that allows employers to bluff through proximity lines and check up on these people, that's when you enforce the kind of stigmatization that these people are antagonists toward your society. That they're not just sick, that they don't just carry a disease, that they are fundamentally an enemy to the state. And that's when we think that when you revoke the rights of the breach to privacy, you enforce that kind of stigma that we don't agree. But lastly is the ridiculous idea that came from Vishal. Sit down, man. Is this idea of how you homogenize the HIV patients and then people will come out. Look, if you want to escape condemnation, if you think that this will somehow shift for people finding out, tell me what would be the incentive for people to get off their asses, people like you and I, to go and find out if we have HIV. Creating a database, more often than not, will insulate me even further from ever wanting to check myself, because I know my information is going to be on a public board that can be accessible by anyone who can lie through the lines of proximity and find out about my information. So no, it's a bit counterproductive as far as your database is concerned to say that the moment you create a database, everyone in this room will suddenly find the incentive to get up and go have a check. Why? Because I want to let the world know that I have HIV, so stay away from me. Ridiculous. 4 arguments, sit down. Number 1, assimilation. Number 2, non-cooperation. Thirdly, why we need to induce responsibility from a positive reinforcement perspective. And lastly, the law. Firstly, in terms of assimilation. It is known by the medical faculty in the medical institution that HIV patients need to assimilate back into society as far as normality is concerned. When you put their information out there for public consumption, this will not work. Number 1, there are no caveats as far as they're concerned to ever control the flow of this information above and beyond the people who can claim that they are proximately close to these people. When there's no caveats to control this information and that flow, that's when we think there is a domino ripple effect in terms of how this information can travel and how this information can be perceived by general society at large. What does that mean? It means there's a higher propensity under their model for the public, people who don't necessarily need to have this information, to have this information, and largely stigmatize and discriminate these people based on the pure fact that they have HIV. What this does is it compromises the very efforts states make in current status quo to assimilate these people back into common society from a proper perspective, that they're not antagonists to the state, they are just sick and we need to help these people. You distort that very rhetoric, you stigmatize these people even further. Secondly, sit down, is this idea of non-cooperation. The moment I know that I might have HIV or I'm engaged in promiscuity and I might contract this disease, right now people are fine with checking themselves because the medical results are only confined to themselves and the medical institution. When you allow this to happen, even if I feel that I might have contracted HIV or I might have syphilis or gonorrhea, I'm never going to want to step into a hospital because I know the privacy, the confidentiality now is not just shared between me and my doctor, it is out there for public consumption. These are the types of flimsy caveats that will create a non-cooperative state of mind where people will not want to come out and check themselves. What do you do then? You diminish the pool of people, or you diminish the capacity for the states to identify these people. More so, you diminish the capacity for the medical institution to ever identify these people and to help them. Why is identification important? Sit down. Because HIV is a condition where only the medical institution can help you. They're the only ones that can help you as far as medical advice is concerned and how to regulate your lifestyles in a proper manner. When you diminish the capacity of these people, Madam Chair, what you naturally do is you reduce the pool of identifiable people who have HIV, and we think that's problematic. You help a less number of people go.
tell me why a HIV positive individual would not want to go to the hospital, considering there's a clause of proximity, as well as he will die if he doesn't go to the hospital. What's the incentive there?
No, yeah, we agree that he might subscribe to certain forms of medication and so on and so forth. But if he knows that his world is going to be stigmatized to the point where he will be discriminated as far as employment is concerned, where he lives, by his community, then we think that there's never going to be a chance in hell that this person will be willingly wanting to go to a hospital in the early stages in which he might be cured. A person will then only seek medical attention or medical advice when things are far too late, when things have become too grave. That's what you do under your model. Early detection and early prevention is fundamentally mitigated under your instance. Thirdly, is the idea of induced responsibility. The best way to make these individuals feel comfortable about their lives is to induce proper, responsible lifestyles in terms of positive reinforcements. What you do when you publicly publish them as antagonists to the state, where you revoke the rights of privacy in totality, is you create this anti-establishment mentality as far as HIV patients are concerned. That's when we think the law is fundamentally not really fair. Why? When you establish these people as antagonists to the state, a place they don't belong to, you disrupt the very ability for these individuals to ever think that they're okay, to ever have a chance for them to cure themselves. These are the types of mentalities that you skew in the public. We're fine with spouses checking in consent, going to medical institutions and acquiring this information. If you have HIV and you intentionally spread it, we're fine with criminalizing that act. You're a threat to society. But public consumption and not being able to control that flow of information to the point where you discriminate and are able to stigmatize people, that's the difference in this debate we're very, very proud to oppose.
Madam Chair, I feel sorry for this opposition team, a team that sounds, three speakers that sound so flustered when they talk about sex. Ladies and gentlemen, I hope they last a bit longer in bed. But essentially, Madam Chair, it was very easy to see how the case of the opposition was on a decline ever since the first speech, when they suddenly realized that they were principally inconsistent right from the start, ladies and gentlemen. Because right from Mark's speech, he told you that the right to privacy and the right to contain what is within our bodies, ladies and gentlemen, was tantamount to whether or not such viruses can cause other people harm. That's why he told you that if I as an individual can prove that I will, or I want to, or I intend to have sex with another human being, like in Maldives or in Malaysia, ladies and gentlemen, then I have a right to breach the confidentiality of another person. Now, how is that any more different than what the model was proposed from the government's bench? When we told you that if you can tell the US Department of Health Services that you have a girlfriend or a wife, and you have sufficient evidence to prove this, if you can prove the proximity that you have with that patient, with that individual, ladies and gentlemen, then you will have access to that information. But even if, ladies and gentlemen, the information is not disseminated by the health center or the health registry, we told you that there will still exist discourse between these two potential sexual partners, ladies and gentlemen, because not only have we made it a crime to spread sexually transmitted diseases, but we make it a crime to lie about your status as well, ladies and gentlemen. And that is the fundamental difference, and that is the fundamental, that's the crux, ladies and gentlemen, of the government's case, and that's why we think we can enforce this law better than they can. We don't think that it's possible for them to criminalize HIV, the spread of STDs, without having a proper biological database in which you can track whoever the host or the original carrier of that disease was. It's very easy to investigate a girl who simply has one sex partner per month, ladies and gentlemen. But if an individual has sex on multiple days with multiple partners, it becomes that much harder to decide where that HIV virus eventually came from in the first place. It doesn't come with a barcode, ladies and gentlemen. So I have a couple of things to talk about in my speech today. Firstly, is it fair to mandate the carriers of STDs to disclose such information? Secondly, which model better protects HIV patients? Thirdly, which model provides better access to healthcare? Now, firstly, Now, whether or not it's fair to mandate the carriers of STDs to disclose this information, ladies and gentlemen. The Leader of Opposition told us essentially that it's unfair to hold these individuals accountable because sexual encounters are usually subjective, they're usually unplanned, they can happen at the heat of the moment, and it's unfair to burden individuals to uptake finding out such information as it stands. On a second level, he told you it exacerbates the antagonization of HIV sufferers when we breach their right to privacy. On the first response, ladies and gentlemen, I'm not sure why the side opposition thinks that because modern sex culture dictates that free sex is fine and having multiple sexual partners is fine, that necessarily legitimizes individuals having sex without any predisposition as to the status of their partners, ladies and gentlemen. Because just by saying sex is rampant doesn't give an excuse for individuals to act outside the duties that the state imposes towards them, ladies and gentlemen. When we criminalize and provide a public database based on STDs, then the state has shifted the burden now towards individuals like you and me. So that the next time we think about having sex, it then becomes our duty as individuals to ensure that our sexual partners are free from these viruses, ladies and gentlemen. Because under your model, people have no incentive to do such things because people are always going to hide behind the veil of, oh, I did it while I was in love. I did it because of the heat of the moment. I did it while I was passionate, ladies and gentlemen. And they can always hide behind that veil, but it doesn't happen under status quo. On a second level, we tell you that our policy of creating a public database raises awareness, ladies and gentlemen. Because that's how STDs are primarily spread, exactly as Mark told you. And we stop that because we ensure that individuals now take up that responsibility to find out about their partners before it happens. Before I move on to my second and third clash, yes, Tim.
So, on the basis of just proximity alone, right, that necessitates the ultimate breach of privacy of an individual's medical records. Wouldn't you think that proximity is a legitimate excuse as far as employers who call in and say, I'm worried about the health in general of my workers, I need to know whether this person has HIV? Wouldn't that proximity be liable under your case?
No, it doesn't make any sense. See, because this is called, the reason it's sexually transmitted diseases, ladies and gentlemen, means that it can only be spread through sexual encounters or like an exchange of blood, as Smith told you. We told you, ladies and gentlemen, that if you're a domestic individual and you want to find it out, then you can tell them that you want to have sex with this person. If you're an employee, ladies and gentlemen, and the nature of that work sufficiently warrants the finding out of your HIV status, then we're fine with that as well. It stops people from getting harmed, it stops people from dying. That's good, ladies and gentlemen. So let's talk about the concerns that Kim had in his speech. Because he told you that the opposition's fear is that individuals with HIV will not now come to hospitals and health centers to seek treatments because of this kind of discrimination. We tell you that there are already sufficient counterbalances to this. Firstly, we think, ladies and gentlemen, that the idea of self-preservation is in itself a natural incentive for people to come forward. We think that even throughout decades and decades of modern history, ladies and gentlemen, that HIV has been prevented. In spite of the kind of shame and humiliation that people go through, we still have reported cases of HIV every single day, ladies and gentlemen. Which means there are still people who are brave enough to come forward and seek treatment and cure themselves, ladies and gentlemen. Secondly, we tell you that the caveats that Jasmine talked about are probably sufficient enough and will restrain the amount of damages and concerns that opposition had. But on the third level, we tell you that even if this is the case, ladies and gentlemen, the state cannot allow the propensity of that individual to harm a pool of other individuals out there, ladies and gentlemen, and spread that virus at the expense of his shame and humiliation, ladies and gentlemen. As a state, we have to prioritize real, tangible harms, such as the lives and the livelihood of other individuals, not just the shame and humiliation and the emotional harms that one person might feel. Thirdly, which model better protects HIV patients? This is where Mifsal's speech went completely ignored. Because he told you that when HIV or STD spread, it is more likely that individuals are blamed wrongfully, ladies and gentlemen. When you have a proper public database, it ensures that there's proper discourse, there's proper dissemination of information, and the proper culprits are caught, ladies and gentlemen, not just every other Tom, Dick, and Harry who admits to having STDs. We need to stop antagonization, but we need to also protect lives, and we need to go with side government. Thank you.
Yeah, yeah.
Mr. Speaker, when an individual has AIDS, it is unfair to assume that he will purposely spread this disease the moment he has sex. The distinction of intent and criminal intent happens under our paradigm. The difference is, ladies and gentlemen, I will even deal this in the issue, that it only involves necessary party. And I explicitly show to you what are the harms of allowing the floodgate of the public to know about this, ladies and gentlemen. This is how I'll settle the debate. This is how I'll draw distinction to this debate. I'll show difference of why the harm is especially expansionated, or it's big under their paradigm, Mr. Speaker. I think the whole idea of proximity versus wave was not untouched, but I'll deal with that idea later. And this whole idea of antagonistic society, how do they deal with an antagonistic society that wants to discriminate? Screw that. That already discriminate people on the grounds of HIV. How do you mitigate a problem? Not so much response at all. I'll deal with this debate in the 3 caveats. Is this policy practical? Because that's the debate, ladies and gentlemen. Number 2, I'll even be nice. I'll deal with this problem principally, right? I'll talk about how the idea of accountability that the Prime Minister want to talk about, I'll deal with the idea. Thirdly, I'll talk about how, the word that you will need to use is not homogenize, Mimsal. The word you need to use is vindicate. How under status quo you think that they might vindicate self-declared HIV people, right? I will also deal with that idea. But let's deal with this idea of, is this policy practical? Here is why the contradiction starts, Mr. Speaker. The transmission of HIV, which is not entirely the debate, but never mind. The transmission of HIV, ladies and gentlemen, is through fluids, or genital fluids, or semen, or whatever. But to trace it, you need 6 months. This is where it gets interesting. Under their paradigm, there's a big propensity for false negative and false positive. Medical students, you know this, right? Because you need the time for 6 months to prove whether the person has HIV or not. But even if, ladies and gentlemen, if you don't know this, right? The problem with that case is that you need to show proximity. You need to have permission from the authority to get this information. I.e., if I want to have sex with you tonight, I will go ask you to go and check in that, in that Facebook page or whatever for you to get this policy. This is exceptionally problematic under Mimsal's point. Because, ladies and gentlemen, Mimsal in his speech conceded that the problem of HIV and AIDS becomes rampant due to open sex or free sex or modern sex. But how does modern sex fit into the idea of getting authority every day and every night? The problem is that you have a bitch policy. You should have gone gung-ho and created create a iPad app or iPhone app that allows people to do this. But no, but you still want to win this cake, eat the cake and everything. That's why you shot yourself in the foot. But the last point is this. He said that, kindergarten, the problem is rampant. Kindergarten students are getting AIDS. Yeah, kindergarten students are having a problem. You have to be realistic in this sense. The reason why the disease spread is because people take this issue for granted. People don't think about going and check. How do you fit into the idea of spur of moment, heat of moment, when your actions and you knowing such an important benefit under your paradigm needs to be one that is time sensitive, needs to be one that has to go through a long process, ladies and gentlemen. You all know Yuti Mara authority. If this policy was done in Malaysia, if this week tonight you want to have sex, ladies and gentlemen, next Deepavali you will know. You know the result, right? But the problem is this, ladies and gentlemen. This is where the case becomes even more complicated. If, for example, I want to have sex with you tonight, and I want to find out that I want to find out whether you have or not. Even if I go to that place and tell the authority that I'm going to have sex with person A, and I want this to happen, a married man or a person with this victim can choose to deny my inquisition, ladies and gentlemen, or choose to deny the fact that I want to know. I.e., the centralization of decision, how this information is distributed, is very political, can be determined by an unfair party. Therefore, the information or the benefit of knowing is not done. The difference is, ladies and gentlemen, under our paradigm, there is confidentiality. That means the only necessary party comes into factor. If you're going to marry this person, we will let you know. We think that's important. If you have been damaged by the fact that he purposely spread the disease to you with a criminal intention, we will punish you. The problem of this policy, how it won't be practical, because confidentiality has legal safeguard. The moment you breach confidentiality, you can be liable. But under their paradigm, when the Prime Minister told you in his first line, we don't care about this person's privacy. That means person who she said that privacy is not important. The moment you deny this person privacy or you revoke this person's privacy, abuse can be done by anyone and it cannot be mitigated, ladies and gentlemen. That's why this problem is problematic. But go with that.
Assuming but price you're willing to pay or not pay if the converse burden is that people might be infected with AIDS and place a mandatory death sentence on them for life.
Dude, the problem is, under your paradigm, you don't really know how this information, you might not get this information. Information can be denied to you. Information can include unnecessary party. Information can include abuse. These are lists of abuse and lists of harms that you never engage with. Let's go to the second idea. The Prime Minister's 5 points, ladies and gentlemen, can be summed up into one sentence. How individuals should be accountable if possible harms can be injected into innocent individuals, ladies and gentlemen, innocent parties. That's the entire case. But the problem is this. We think it's unfair burden, ladies and gentlemen, because this man can still be innocent. It's assumed guilty. It is assumed irrationality. And the law has never worked in that way, ladies and gentlemen. You allow these people to be harmed because Mark actually told you this idea. How privacy is the last barrier for protection. This is how this person can, live a normal life. Because if let's say if his girlfriend is in the same office and the girlfriend tells the authority, ladies and gentlemen, under your paradigm, you can't produce safeguard. You can't protect this man. The only way this man can act in his own interest if this man is rational. If this man is still irrational, we would already punish him by our policy. But ladies and gentlemen, we still allow some form of room for him to live a normal life, for him to actually find a wife, for him to actually have an income. What is the delineation of having a job, ladies and gentlemen, and spreading HIV? That delineation wasn't drawn, ladies and gentlemen. But the problem is this: should justice be determined on the hands of individual and arbitrary standards, ladies and gentlemen? We think proximity is not good enough an idea as a whole. But let's deal with Mirza idea extensively. How you vindicate openly declared individual, ladies and gentlemen. No one is going to say that, hey, I am HIV, hey, I am HIV. In fact, HIV people don't even carry a tag, like autistic people, ladies and gentlemen. But under our paradigm, if you want to point fingers to someone, if you want to establish damage, you need to show probable cause. Under their paradigm, the moment I see the information in that list, ladies and gentlemen, the damage can already be done. I can already deny employment, I can already deny you as my wife, ladies and gentlemen, I already can show you probable cause, ladies and gentlemen. If my identity will be used as a benchmark for discrimination, and my identity, ladies and gentlemen, will always be used as me being guilty, ladies and gentlemen, we think it's unfair. We think some of the most integral part of individual life, ladies and gentlemen, is that he cannot be always assumed as a criminal. It is unfair, it is unjust. But more practically, ladies and gentlemen, this is a case that doesn't even have any practical sense. If I have a conversation with you later and I ask to illustrate how will this policy work, they haven't illustrated yet. You know what? They have complicated it. They haven't solved the problem yet. Thank you very much.
The problem in this debate was they were willing to accept that there is a minute possibility that I will check upon my random sexual partners, find out if they have HIV, at the expense of violating and breaching sovereign rights to privacy of an individual who is not a criminal, but an individual who is sick. That's what they needed to prove, that a minute chance of an individual checking upon her partner was a good enough justification to violate the person's privacy totality. Did they do that? Let's check it out. First argument, or the first debacle of the debate, was what yardstick of proximity were you going to use? From Jasmine's speech, we heard her for the first 5 minutes talk about proximity. It was a very lengthy model. And proximity by her standards was, as long as you're close to this person, as long as this person can justify certain forms of closeness. Rafiq totally negated that. He says, it's not enough for proximity to be there. You need to be in some sort of relationship with this person. You need to be in a relationship, you need to establish yourself as a boyfriend, as a girlfriend, or something of that sort. But if an employer, per se, were to call up and say, I'm worried that my 2 co-workers might be sleeping with each other, and that could potentially have a detrimental effect on my work, on my business, on the state, was that proximity a good enough yardstick? We never got that response. The question is, to what yardstick and to what benchmark would your proximity apply? And why is this question pertinent? Because it's pertinent to the point in which where this information will flow. And you cannot disregard the fact that there are not enough caveats in that model, as lengthy as it was, to control that very information and to which extent it flows. Why? Because I told you, their benefits is identification of this person. But our benefits will trump that to show you that the identification can happen under a model. If you're seriously want to get married, go and have a check. if you have HIV and we find out that you know you have HIV and you spread this disease to a person, we can criminalize you. Identification will happen. But where do we trump them? Is that we know where to draw the boundaries of the flow of this information, because we understand that detrimental effects if this information goes too far. Such as what? Firstly, we told you that if the information goes too far to people who don't necessarily need this information, they can't negate that. This information will flow to these groups of people. They will be stigmatized. They will be antagonized. They will be seen as antagonists towards the state. Why is this bad? Because HIV is currently regarded as a disease that is fundamentally antagonistic towards people. That you are immediately of a different lower rung towards society the moment you contract HIV. This disintegrates and reinforces the stigmatization that HIV patients currently have if you're not able to control the flow of this information. That's where the breach of privacy is fundamentally under their model. But secondly, we also told you that in the event you want to find out if your partner's got HIV, if the guy is fine about exposing this information, he would tell you anyway. This debate is about people wanting to find out behind their partner's back. So the model fails as well. Because if I want to call you and find out if you're willing to espouse this information to your partner, you're not going to be able to do that. They want to criminalize that action. So that means this person's consent never mattered to begin with, Mr. Speaker. That's the second failure of that model. Consent and arbitration as to this person's willingness to espouse information is non-existent in their model. So what is the key difference between both teams today and how you adjudicate this debate? Firstly, is the idea of is it necessary to breach his privacy as to his medical condition in order to facilitate national security or a social security? Not necessary. They haven't shown us why our model is fundamentally destructive. In fact, they just call it the same as theirs. It's not. The caveats are the same when we have a better amount of control of this information as to where it goes. Your vague line of proximity will lead to massive amounts of information flow to groups of people that don't need this information. And then you blur the lines of discrimination, because as much as we try to help you as an individual, as much as a medical institution tells you that you're a normal human being, that you should assimilate back into society. But if this information gets out to people who are not supposed to know, which they cannot control, that's when we think the breach of privacy is the ultimate be-all and pun intended end-all of your life. We're very proud of this.
And the opposition replies by the government replies to anticipate.
Madam Chair, we told you right from the start that this debate happens on two fronts. Number one, it's about policing and how do we best catch offenders when it comes to spreading of HIV/AIDS or sexually transmitted disease, but it's also about domestic use. The failure of opposition is that they wanted to talk about domestic use and privacy, but never wanted to negate us on the idea that we need this to ensure proper policing and enforcement when it comes to catching individuals who intentionally spread HIV or STDs, Mr. Speaker. For them to fly in the first clash, Mr. Speaker, they had to prove to us that the alternatives exist. What did they tell us? They told us that 6 months period of finding out for HIV is a problem. For what reason it ought with, they told us this response, we don't know. But what did we tell you consistently from the start? That number one, you can't determine whether a person has HIV through hair follicles. You can't determine whether a person has HIV through semen, Madam Chair. You can only be able to find out whether a person is HIV after you take a blood sample and test them extensively. The purpose of a database is that you don't need, once a crime has been committed, to find out all the necessary, all nearby suspects, test them, wait for 6 months, and then only investigate the case. The point of having a database is to have a national registry that was already pre-prepared so that you can continue with the investigation without having the evidence lost on the way and having to catch the culprit correctly and immediately, Madam Chair. That's why we told you right from the get-go that they didn't ever want to negate, Madam Chair. But secondly, here's where largely opposition's case took place, right? The domestic use of this policy. Will there be a floodgate? Because we see in many instances of the law that we use the subjectivity of proximity to establish whether or not you can access certain records. Public financial records of companies, even the National DNA Registry of the UK and the United States of America, you can only access this registry when you can establish proximity. They told us that we never established what proximity was. Clearly they weren't listening. We told you if it's sexually transmitted disease, then people that you want to have sex with or could have sex with, Madam Chair, Or, Madam Chair, we even told you in Jasmine's speech that if you're in the line of work that puts you in close proximity to people that may involve you being in contact and may involve you getting cut or anything like that, like I told you, kindergarten teachers and that sort of thing, the propensity of harm enables you to use the yardstick of proximity to negate this person's privacy because the harm is so much greater than any other instance. That's why proximity works. But even if proximity is a vague yardstick, Madam Chair, they never once wanted to tell us why privacy was a valid yardstick to negate the level of harm that each person who intentionally went out and spread his HIV/AIDS out into society, who imposed onto society, especially when the DNA that you collect of the rape victim cannot be cross-referenced across any sort of database and be easily identifiable within the first maybe 6 months, Madam Chair. We think that is a harm, Madam Chair, and we're willing to sacrifice some privacy to protect individuals in society. They wanted to ask, what if people say no? Well, if I'm your husband and you ask for my records and I say no, I don't know you, you're not in proximity to me, and my wife finds out that I didn't say she was my wife, number one, Amira Natasha will kill me, but number two, she will know that I'm trying to hide something, Madam Chair. That's why the discourse happens and people will take a precaution against that instance, Mr. Speaker. That's a benefit. Lastly is this free sex culture. That's why we told you that you need to shift towards the person having to shift away from the heat of the moment. That's why when you know that if you're in the heat of the moment and you spread it unintentionally, you might be criminally liable. That's why that shifts the culture and that's why that's more beneficial. Lastly, my argument, Madam Chair, I told you the employees also are okay with wouldn't discriminate this person after this because there is a delineation between criminal and civilian STD people that you're now being able to now delineate between people who are caught and people who are criminal, Mr. Speaker. We think that that enables you to lift the stigma of people you want to employ because now you know these people are criminal, these people are evil, these people register themselves and they're innocent. That reduces stigma. We think that's extremely beneficial. We want on both fronts. We are very proud to propose